What if the key to better creative work isn't more talent or bigger budgets, but a stronger partnership between creative and operations? That's a shift this episode explores. Because as creative teams are pushed to do more faster, the old handoff model where ops manages timelines and creatives deliver assets, well, that world is breaking down. In its place is something new, something emerging, a strategic collaboration where operations just doesn't support creativity, it enables it. To unpack that shift, I sat down with two people who are living it every day at Wayfair. Kyle Wright is Wayfair's creative director, leading brand storytelling across channels, and Brianne Gallagher, who is the head of creative operations with over a decade of experience scaling op systems for a high volume, high growth brand. And together over time, they redefined what creative ops collaboration can look like between creative and operations, from rethinking the briefing process to protecting creative headspace and even mapping out new tooling for strategy led workflows. This episode gets into the real challenges behind that evolution. So, how do you operationalize thinking time? What does a creative brief look like when it starts with a conversation, not a form? And how do you balance scale and storytelling? And can you have your cake and eat it too? So, if you're trying to move your team from reactive execution to proactive strategy or build systems that support creative impact at scale, this one's for you. Here's my conversation with Kyle and Brianne. All right, Kyle Wright and Brianne Gallagher from Wayfair, welcome to the Creative Ops Podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
Excited to be back.
Yes, Brianne, you've been here before. I can't remember what the episode number was, but I loved that episode because we got into Hollywood mode around resource management, which has actually led to a whole bunch of follow-on commentary and DMs from folks. And I'm super excited about today's episode because it's going to be a blend of like creative ops and creative leadership. One of the topics I've really wanted to dock more into is what is the relationship like between a creative ops leader and a creative leader? And Kyle, you're a creative leader at Wayfair.
Yes.
And in just a minute, I'm going to get both of you just give us like sort of a 60 to 90 second, like, who are you? What do you do? Type of thing. But the reason I wanted to dock into this conversation and this topic more broadly is like the creative operations and creative leader relationship is critical. It always has been, but it seems like it's been in a state of evolution recently as creative operations has matured, as the work of creatives and creative leaders is also evolving, especially in this world of, always on marketing and content, creative automation, and, the 800-pound elephant in everybody's creative and creative ops room, AI. So today we're just going to have a open, wide-ranging conversation about the relationship. We'll look at it through the lens of, your relationship at Wayfair and how that's evolved, and we'll see where our curiosity takes us. But before we dive into all that, Brianne, you've been on before, so I'll ask Kyle to go first. Kyle, give us like 90 seconds. Who is Kyle? What do you do? What's your role at Wayfair?
Yeah. So I head up the North American creative team here at Wayfair. I have been at the company for almost 13 years, which is crazy. And it has been such a fun and diverse and educational journey over the years. When I joined Wayfair, I truly thought that I was joining the biggest company in the world because I was coming from a magazine background. And I joined to lead copywriting for the brand, which was going to be I knew going into it that it was going to be just a fun, but like a challenge filled with so many unknowns, specifically for me, because prior to joining, all of my copywriting experience had been freelance. I had never done it in-house for a brand,
Really?
and I had never done it full time. And so I joined thinking that there was going to be someone there to really help me learn the ropes and get me up to speed. And as with any startup, when they're literally a year in, which is what Wayfair as a brand was at that point, things change constantly. And between the time when I accepted the role and started, the creative director that I thought I was going to be reporting into exited. And on my first day, I joined and realized, like, oh, I'm going to have to teach myself this. I'm going to suddenly need to go from being like a B minus copywriter to like an A plus, because there's no one here who's going to help me get up to speed. And so literally on my first day at lunch, I went to the Barnes and Noble across the street from the office at the time and bought a book called Hey Whipple, Squeeze This, that I'm sure many of the folks who listen to this podcast are
Great
familiar
book.
with. It's pretty much the only book out there about copywriting, and had a full-blown panic attack in the cafe at Barnes and Noble because I was like, this is going to be a disaster. Turns out it wasn't. It ended up being like a really fun, um, like very unpredictable and circuitous journey at times. But 13 years later, we've built out a world-class creative team here, and the team today, we have folks from every discipline and every background.
And Kyle's underselling himself. He has his fingerprints all over the brand, especially with how the brand has manifested, the voice, the tone, the identity of it, right? Helped launch our first retail store, was instrumental in the relaunch of our brand 2 years ago.
Yep.
And so I didn't know that you that you taught yourself. So that's actually fun. I've been here 14 years, so 1 year longer. And I lead creative operations. I'm excited to be back on the show. I love talking about creative and creative operations and how to unlock the most creative potential and how operations and production can really support that. So
Well, so you've been there 14 years, as you said, Brianne. Kyle, 13 years for you. And I think there's been, I think it would be fair to say there's probably been a sea change, both in terms of creative and creative
Tsunami change, not a
operation.
sea change, a tsunami change.
A tsunami change. Wow, there
Yes.
you go. We're just docking right into the what would that be? Like oceanic violence.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So Brian, let's start with you in terms of like the meta topic for today. Creative operations, from my perspective, really started off with its mandate being scale and speed. Marketing organizations needed more content to be able to increase marketing velocity because there's an opportunity and appetite for that, and really that's what we've seen creative operations primarily dock itself into since it showed up on the scene probably about 10 years ago. And as you and I know and others know that listen to this podcast, it sort of came out of and evolved from project management. So scale and speed was sort of the origin of why creative operations came to be. From your perspective, what has changed in terms of like the mandate of creative operations? And then I want to pull Kyle in here after that to get his perspective, but I want to put a bit of a spin on that.
So I think creative operations, creative project management, creative trafficking, all of it goes hand in hand with how the business is valuing the creative value itself, right? And so when we first started, it was very scrappy. It was about volume. It was about speed. It wasn't about strategy necessarily. We knew we needed to show up places, so we were checking those boxes. And I think at the time, creative project management was helping get from point A to point B. Now you get to a company that's starting to invest more in a brand, starting to invest more in the voice and the identity. That shifts where creative is falling in the value and how the company values. And by nature of a stronger creative perspective, a need for creative strategy, that's where you there's like a push and pull between creative operations and creative that has to be elevated because it's being put in a different position. It's being put on a different pedestal to drive significant business results. And so I think that's where Kyle and I've actually over 13 plus years have been on this journey and have actually gotten to witness those big and little steps that got us to where we are today, where we're actively pulling in creative to think about distribution plans and
Mhm.
how we show up and what does that mean for our talent and casting, because creative is not just a box you check, it's actually the way that your brand gets served and the customers served it gets served to your customers. And so it's like creative operations by nature of that has to change. It can't just be from getting from point A to point B. It's about giving time to creative to think more strategically. It's about making sure the business knows how to work with them and when to work with them and what inputs they need to be the most successful. And so that's like, we're still on that journey here, but that's like creative operations and creative leadership go hand in hand.
Yeah, and
So
I think the other piece of how the sort of relationship has evolved over the years, you know, I can really only speak to Wayfair in this experience, right? But like at the very beginning, it was the Wild West in terms of how we were doing work. It was really antiquated tools that we were using to track how we were allocating our time and the life cycle of a project. And as creative operations has become a more integral part of how we actually get work done, their role has transitioned not only into being more focused on strategic enablement of the creatives, which is incredibly valuable to me and all of the folks on the team, but creative operations is now really at the forefront of helping us understand what the right tools are for the job, which is a very different way of thinking about it than when I started working with creative ops. And it was, you knew what the tools were going to be. You knew that you were using Adobe Suite or Quark, if you're old enough to even remember what Quark is, things like that. And so, but now, it is much more of a conversation. And I'm finding that creative operations is an incredibly valuable partner in helping us figure out, like, are there tools out there that maybe the creatives haven't even been exposed to yet? And it seems like there's more and more available to us now than there ever had been before. And with, the rise of automation and generative AI, pick your random acronym of whatever it is, creative ops has really helped us figure out, like, what is the right way of getting something done.
So I want to come back to the right way to get something done, especially as we are seeing the rise of automation, AI, things like that. But let's put a pin in that for a second. I want to pick away at a couple of things you both said, and possibly ask an uncomfortable question. Um,
Okay.
We're ready. We're in the
so,
box.
has there been a transition from marketing was driving and creative was then basically um, serving up what marketing wanted?
Yeah.
And do we now live in a world where marketing is, is marketing still driving? Should it still be driving? Or and Brianne, you're really sort of docking into this. Is it more about like creative? Are there two types of creative jobs? In fact, there's sort of the transactional creative of, okay, we need a bunch of content and things like that, and that's going to be enabled by templatization, which is sort of yesterday's automation, and then today's automation and AI. And then there's more the creative mindset. What are we actually trying to achieve? And does creative also act in a way as sort of the defense barrier against marketing organizations? And I'm not saying this is necessarily true at Wayfair, but marketing organizations, from what I can see, do have a tendency to go like, let's just throw a bunch of stuff out there. Let's just more content, more campaigns. And the data is telling us now that audiences are tuning it out. I heard this stat recently at a conference, and somebody shared that one study said 53% of people surveyed would rather watch a field of cows than another piece of advertising content or marketing content, which I find cows, like fields of cows, like
We got to
very
start
soothing.
making those
So
cows into some sort of logo on the
No,
field.
I
it,
was going to say it depends on the type of cow, right? Like, I mean, are they
exactly.
like beautiful cows? Or are they sort of the basic cow? But yeah.
Okay. Well, we're not going to get into cow shaming today, Kyle, but we could do that some Uh, but I guess my question is like, you know, and we'll come back to the evolving relationship between creative ops and creative, but like, what is the evolving relationship between marketing and creative? Because I sort of feel like creative is starting to understand they need to play more of not just a defensive role, but bring creative mindset and not just creative execution to the table?
So I think where you're hinging on is the need for more integrated marketing to unlock the results that you need, right? And so I do think one, there's always going to be a need for, I need this thing, I need this serviceable request, I need this production ask, and it does need to be turned around. That will never change. That is the day to day of how things sort of get serviced and get done. That's what, there's always going to be some demand for it. I think when you think about AI and automation and how it creates it to be less friction to get those things done, what it unlocks is the opportunity for creative and marketing to collaborate more together and have those conversations. So it's like we talked a lot about casting the last time. I'm actually going to talk about real casting, but real casting matters where you're going to be putting the creative. And so those discussions can't be had in a vacuum. And that's where I think, you know, creative actually has a really great perspective of how do you not only get that message, but get that to cut through the noise with the specific audience you need. And so that can't be something that you lob over the fence. It has to be a conversation. And I think where creative ops is coming in is we need to create less friction for those conversations, right? Like something we're toying around is like, do we have less briefs but more meaningful conversations, and you use AI just to record the information you need to record for prosperity? But having those conversations is is, sorry, one of our coworkers just saw us. And having those conversations is so important to actually having a fully integrated campaign. And that's what customers want. That's actually kind of what they expect now. They have higher demands than what they did 5 years ago, 8 years ago. And so we should be having those conversations. And I think we're starting to have that tsunami of change where creatives and creative leadership specifically are getting that seat at the table.
So Kyle, before I pull you in here, building off what Brianne said, I love that because in one of my companies, one of our sayings is the conversation is the work. It's actually, ironically, it's an AI company, and we always say the conversation is the work. Either the conversation between the humans or AI in the loop as part of the conversation, but the conversation is the work. So, from your perspective, like, how's like maybe something like the briefing process that everyone's familiar with? How has that changed? Because Brienne was saying like, oh, it gets sort of thrown over the fence or lobbed over, and then creative executes on it. Because creative is like, the four dudes in the corner with Photoshop or Final Cut Pro or something like that. But we all know it is and can and should be very different in how creative is engaged. Like that's mechanistic creative work, transactional creative work, and that has its place and it's valuable. So how has like the briefing process changed during your 13-year tenure? Because at one
Oh
point
yeah.
it was a lobbying.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the beginning, we didn't really even have briefs. So there's the first, like that was,
There's nothing.
and we were operating for, a couple of years without briefs before we really were in a state where there was enough of a strategic vision from the top down for what we were trying to do and who we were targeting that we could actually start to incorporate those insights and that data in that direction. As creative has taken a much more prominent and strategic role within marketing planning, our briefs have changed so drastically. And what's interesting is that they've actually grown in length, and sometimes when we tell people that, they're surprised and they're like, wait, but it's becoming counterintuitive to what a brief actually is. And I'm like, well, the brief now is so much richer because it actually has information that is incredibly valuable to what the work is going to be. It has information about microcultures and social listening and really, really deep insights into who the customer is and what motivates them and how Wayfair fits into their life. And the other piece that has changed in the briefing process is, for the majority of projects, if they are something that is not a rinse and repeat volume play, we don't kick off a brief unless creative has actually partnered on the writing of that brief and already influenced what the distribution strategy is going to be, what the investment level is going to need to look like. It has just become so much more of a conversation than it ever has been. And we've been living in that world now for the last couple of years. And I only see that continuing to grow in that direction. I think that, maybe with the introduction of new tools or new ways of working, the way that we kick off a brief or record that conversation
Yeah.
or synthesize what we talked about may change. But I think that the need for creative to really be co-piloting the strategy isn't going anywhere and is only going to get more important.
I
The
love the
interesting
fact
thing
that,
is, like, you
sorry,
talk about the length of it, and then people are thinking, oh, the length and the volume. I actually think we need less requests and fewer but more thoughtful strategic briefs.
Yeah.
And that's how you like counterbalance the work and the investment. Is you're not doing 3,000 of those a month. You're doing one that's actually intended to guide a set of work for multiple months. And so the team has a strategic North Star to look at, and then it guides the rest of the high volume work in a way that's truly scalable.
so I do want to dive into this if we can, and if there's anything that is, Wayfair magic sauce, you just say so, and we'll stay away from it. But a couple of comments, and then I'll start to lead us into the dive. Um, Kyle, I love the fact that you said co-pilot because it's, I don't know if it was an intended pun, especially in this age of AI. But being co-pilots and co-creators with marketing and other stakeholders on the brief, and you said, and it sounds like it's a rule. Like if we're not part of creating the brief, then the brief doesn't exist. It's I'm almost thinking about my friend was visiting here in Ottawa, Canada, back home, and he was staying with his parents, and he was saying his mom was really mad at his dad because he bought a rug without talking to her about it, and so, anyways, the rug's being returned because if it's not a co-decision, then it's not a decision.
And hopefully they used Wayfair Canada and it's a very easy and seamless return process for them.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll ask them. They should have. They should have.
Like a true brand icon.
Yeah, but I love the fact that it's co-creating the brief. Um, I also believe like there's two types of briefs. Not to say all briefs fit into one of two buckets, but like transactional briefs for like I need a landing page for a webinar I want to do or something like that. Those things should be fully automated. Like a brief should not exist, and if it does, it should just be automated. And like the creative thinkers don't need to be in the room for that. The creative doers should receive like, oh, here's what we want. And, there's probably a validation process along the way that uses data to go, yes, we should do this landing page, yes or no.
Yeah, and within the context of Wayfair, like we would use our ticketing system for requests like
Yeah.
that versus needing to produce a brief for it.
So tell me a bit about like the brief where you're co-creating. Like Brianne, let's start with you.
Sure.
Who ends up in the room? Like how do you decide who's in the room?
Yeah. We throw a dart and hope it lands. No, I think we try to bring in perspective where we think someone's going to add, consumer insights, right? So we usually have our brand and insights person in the room. We have creative. We have Kyle in the room. We have our media distribution team in the room. We have some sort of analytical arm in the room, and we really are making sure that it's a conversation. And depending on what we are trying to accomplish, we might have a business line owner in the room if we're trying to sell a particular thing to understand how they think it's most marketable or what the competitive edge is for that item versus other items in the market. And we sort of have done two things. So for our creative briefs, they're a lot more hinged on brand and insights and fueled by what performance we want to drive and what audiences we want to show up in. And there's actually like a team that is used to writing those types of briefs. And so they have a really great collaboration model, and they sort of work and lob things and have multiple conversations before they land on what that springboard is for creative. Then there's a group, and there always is probably a group at a company where those folks actually don't always leverage creative. They don't actually know how to engage for the first thing. And for those, we even try to lower that entry even more so, where we have someone from brand, we have a creative leader, we have those business partners in a room, and we just actually have a conversation. And we have a few things that sort of guide that conversation, sort of like a podcast. Um, but we're not very prescriptive of where it goes. We sort of let the conversation wander, and then the creative team, the operations team, is able to ingest that and come up with a recommendation of like, how do we get started here? Because no one's ever done it.
In Kyle, from your perspective, because this didn't happen overnight, it's been an evolution. Because at one point it was fill out the form, lob it over the fence, and then you and your team would just go, okay, they want this, we'll start to act on it. Today
Or,
it's
well,
Where's
maybe it was more like they lob it over the fence, and then our creative team decides when to push back on it versus just acting on it. Because we've never been a group that has been particularly quiet, I guess.
right.
Yeah.
So it makes me think again of my friend's parents, right? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
a discussion or let's say a vigorous discussion after the
Yeah.
fact. But now it's more of a conversation from the get-go. How have you seen that change relationship between yourself and like the broader creative team and the other like quote unquote people in the creative bucket that Brianne was mentioning, and the business stakeholders? Like are they coming in with more of an open mind and help us shape like what we're trying to achieve and how we go about doing that?
Yeah. So from a business stakeholder perspective, it took a minute for them to get comfortable welcoming in a co-pilot on something that, previously their success in their job would have been defined by how well they were able to kick something off. But the reality is that simply by the nature of building good relationships, sort of forcing our way in where we needed to, and accepting invitations where we didn't have to force our way in, it proved out very quickly that all of the best performing work was coming through this sort of new partnership of really leading with prioritizing the customer and therefore bringing creative in super early, because at the end of the day, creative is the number one guardian for the customer within an organization. That's my opinion. Within the creative team, I think the creatives now feel more empowered, but it also puts a new level of pressure on them. And that has forced folks to level up their game to some degree. I would say that's true for the creatives and also for creative ops. It changes the profile of some of the folks that you need on the team, specifically when you get to the mid and more senior levels, because those are the folks who are really going to be more driving in the strategy and in the weeds. And so, it has created at times a bit of an identity crisis. We call it like the awkward adolescence of like, hey, we're growing up here, and this is like an interesting time to redefine what it means to be a creative at Wayfair, because your role is really changing. But I think that overall I think everyone would universally agree that it's been overwhelmingly positive. And now we're at a point where in the last couple of months, we've actually added folks to the creative team that are specifically there to drive a strategy. And that has been a net new role that has already proven out in spades how valuable that is. And I think that's only going to grow over time.
I think there's this like perception in general that things are hard or slow to get done because it requires so much upfront work to get started. And I think when you prove out that conversation, those discussions, that education of like, this is what performed well, this is social listening, this is the customer we're going after, this is how we're thinking about our distribution, that actually enables better creative work, which then has a flywheel effect of better outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And like the need for that upfront is actually like, yeah, it takes more time than just lobbing a ticket over and getting started. but the results are better. And actually, the work scales better because we actually know where it's going. We understand how long it needs to live. We know where it needs to be flexible versus where it needs to be like very firm. And so like that's been like the interesting thing to me is like, and I think that's just human nature. People don't want to slow down to speed up. It just feels counterintuitive, but it's like actually true for creative work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And it's sort of like everybody wants the, you know, 30-day plan for everything in life, right? It's human nature. We just want the easy button and convenient, but the things that actually do have lasting value, you got to invest into it, right? You got to invest into it through those conversations. And Kyle, as you said, building those relationships, taking a minute to do the work to like consider what are we actually trying to achieve here? Is it the right thing we're trying to achieve based on where the business wants to go, based on what customers seem to be asking for and how they've been reacting to our products, campaigns, everything else, and then let's make some bets on how we want to go about achieving these outcomes. I'm sort of fascinated by the commentary about like it sort of changed what you're looking for in talent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it probably means that you've been upskilling or like transitioning some of your existing talent, looking for different capabilities and people that you're bringing in. So, Kyle, let's start with you. Like from a creative point of view, are you looking for more that strategic thinking or more the doing work of like somebody who's really good at like using the tools, where those tools are like the ones we know like Photoshop or like the new generation of automation and AI tools?
So it truly depends on the role and what the person is going to be doing. I would say at the leadership level, so maybe let's say like mid-level leader and above, um, the emphasis has certainly in most parts of the creative organization shifted towards them needing to be more of a strategic partner and being able to really be someone who's going to be able to challenge the status quo uh, in productive ways, um, figure out how to do things smarter and smarter. Some often means faster, but not necessarily faster, but better, and really be able to like dig in on a strategy and help really craft what that's going to be. At the more junior levels, we are still looking for doers. There's a lot of work to be done there, and then we do have more senior doers on the team as well, depending on what the needs for the area of the business that they're working on are. We have a relatively large in-house creative team, and we're in the process right now of bringing in more external points of view to augment that creative team. And what we have found is that you need sort of a mid to senior level person who can really dig in with those agencies, those vendors, or those contractors, because the they are never able to deliver work that doesn't require edits, revisions, or redirection.
So when you say like bring in more external points of view, you're talking about agencies who may come in and sort of like do a strategy engagement with you
Yeah,
or
strategic engagement, or if it's like a highly specialized area that our team simply cannot make the time for, or doesn't have the right level of expertise, or um, yeah, like that. We're starting to move into a model that does create more space for more points of view outside of the walls of just
That's part
Wayfair.
of our like evolve resource casting
Yeah.
strategy to make sure that you're putting the right people in that's going to drive the right result or push the internal team to learn from to get them to break into that space. The thing that I think, Kyle, like I'm seeing with the talent that is really shows the most potential is that curiosity. So like that curiosity of like what happens after I deliver this
Yeah.
work, where does it perform, what does it see, what's in it. And so you're actually hearing more creatives today asking, can I see the context of where this is being served? I don't want to look at it on my like 36-inch MacBook Pro. I want to actually look at it on this iPhone screen to understand what the customer experience
Totally.
is. And then I actually want to follow that a step further and see where are they landing, and then what are they doing once they land. Oh, this piece over here maybe could be better from a creative perspective. I should go figure out how to fix this. Those are the folks that I feel like are really thriving with this greater accountability. And I think that's
Absolutely.
like the same for operations. It's like, okay, we're going to do this thing. But then the folks that are asking, okay, we do it once, but how do we do this twice or 20 times or 50 times? Or how do we actually make sure that this can scale or is driving the demand that it needs to in order to warrant that level of effort and support over time? And so, like, that's like kind of the framework. Those people asking why, and even in those doer spaces, they're probably doing the same, but they're doing like, what's new about this technology? What's new about this thing? What could I be doing differently that makes this work a little bit faster and less monotonous? Those are the folks that I feel like are really starting to rise in this
Absolutely.
environment.
And the other question that I'm hearing folks ask themselves, which I think is an indicator of strategic thinking or the ability to adapt, is, hey, a tool doesn't exist to do this for me today, but if that tool existed, how would this work? Like, would I be able to scale this if something could do X, Y, and Z? And can I build the template that I'm working in to future proof against that? Of course, that's never going to be perfect. Of course, maybe 3 out of 10 things that people are trying to future proof will actually be able to scale in the future. But that type of thinking is something that we're really trying to encourage and sort of incubate here on the creative team.
I think that's awesome. And I actually think it's on its way from going from 3 out of 10 to 8 or 9 out of 10, because we do live in a world of like infinitely, the Overton window of possibilities has like blown wide open over the last
Yeah.
couple of years. And I love what you're both saying. It's more about systems thinking, more about like what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and then let's work backwards to figure out how we get there, versus somebody put something on my plate. I got to figure out how to get it to the next milestone and then across the finish line, which is important. But I think we need more of that. Like, let's start with the end in mind and come back here and figure out like what's the best way to achieve that outcome. Like, outcomes based thinking is systems thinking. And that's really what we need more of, both on the ops side and the creative side.
And the marketing side, I think when marketing starts with
Yep.
outcomes versus I need this box, they're starting, like, they get better results too. Like, if the business is
Totally.
focused on outcomes first, everything gets stronger and better.
Yeah, I do feel bad for marketing organizations these days, especially CMOs, which I think is the most confused executive role on the planet. Because we've all seen the reports about 18-month average tenure and things like that, and I think it's because the CMO over time has sort of been forced into trying to become everything, like a brand guardian, and also responsible for this week's funnel, and ROI on ad spend, and do we buy a Super Bowl ad or not, and everything else in between. And it's a lot of competing priorities. And I'm starting to think it might be time to maybe the CMO becomes the marketing operations executive. And Kyle, I'll bring it back to you here. I've been starting to toy with the idea that creative mindset is going to be a required part of every company's DNA moving forward, in every part of the organization. So it's not just about creating marketing content. It's about like that creative mindset of what are the problems we should focus on solving? How do we solve them? How do we bring a creative mindset to it? I would not know how to draw anything more than a stick figure, even if my life depended on it, because I have no dexterity in terms of drawing, painting, or anything else. But I have a weird and wonderful imagination, and it expresses itself in different ways. Podcasting being one of the ways. But I think that creative mindset is going to be critical, and I wonder if what are your thoughts, or what are you seeing happen at Wayfair in terms of like more attention being paid to are we thinking and acting creative in every part of the business? And do you see a role for like creative leaders like yourself, you know, being pulled into that more into like an organizational wide capability?
Yeah, I think that is, I think, a goal that we hold here on the creative team and within the marketing organization. I think that many brands that are focused on rapid scale and trying to do a lot of different things and be a lot of different things to a lot of different people, which I would say is Wayfair to some degree, is challenging to, it makes it harder for that to happen. But I think the areas in which creative has been able to really deliver an outsized influence are the areas that first and foremost prioritize the customer. And so I'm thinking about the role that creative played in the development of physical retail stores for Wayfair, which are a massive um, undertaking for the brand and like a huge priority for how we believe we'll be able to connect with customers and drive long-term brand affinity in the future. And so creative wasn't just on the hook to make sure that that store looked beautiful. Creative was involved in every single step of the journey over a multi-year process, making sure that each decision that we made was designed to make the customer feel a certain way when they are in the store, make the brand show up in a way that feels highly, highly tangible and actually tells the story of what we're doing, and supports the brand character that we spent a lot of time and a lot of money and have a lot of conviction in actually building. Um, and what that is doing is, uh, for areas where we do have a store, that has driven to an increase in, it's creating basically like an incredibly successful halo around brand health, but also around sales, regardless of whether or not someone's purchasing in the store, because they're more likely to actually understand who
What
the
the
brand
brand is.
is.
Yeah.
I
The thing about that project too is like that creative mindset and that thinking of serving the customer first wasn't just like your team evangelized it, but you got
Oh, that was
others to like,
across the
it was
board.
across the
Yeah,
board from merchandisers to
from the top down.
facilities to
Yeah,
thinking about the lighting rigs. Like it's truly incredible. And like I think the work you and your team did, Kyle, to take something that had such a digital footprint for so long and create the physical manifestation. I think the first time I saw it, I actually like cried in the store. I was like, this is our brand. And I heard that from other people because it was just it was an experience that immersed you in the feeling and the friendliness. And like that was driven largely by how Kyle brought that vision to life with his team. And
many folks played a
many
very
people,
significant role in that. That was not just the creative team, but what worked so particularly well on that project was, from the top down, the person who was running physical retail stores wanted it to be,
an
for
experience.
first and foremost, an experience for the customer.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And while I don't like visiting Chicago because I have to go through O'Hare, I'm now tempted to go to your store there. That
I
is,
like to fly into Midway if you can swing it, and it's a lot easier. I'm just gonna say.
it is a lot easier. So yes, good tip. I now want to go to the store because I'm loving what you're saying. Because to me, brand has sort of become orphaned in most organizations. Like brand has basically sort of been diluted to, we have brand guidelines. Like here's our logo, here's how you apply it, here's like how you need to like the font to use and things like that. And that to me is like just sort of like the tactical surface level stuff. Like brand to me is how anybody inside and externally to the company experiences it. And Brianne, you just said it, like when you had an emotional reaction when you walked into the store and how your customers or hope for customers are experiencing that brand like through this physical experience. Like that to me is amazing. And these are the types of stories I love to hear because to me that is where creative shows its full power. It's integrated into the company. what the company is trying to do strategically, and Wayfair's retail investments are new.
Yeah.
And I think it's smart in a world of increasing automation to like build out for retail. I know a lot of people go, that seems like counterintuitive. And I'm like, no, I think shopping's going back to physical stores because we're going to get bored with like infinite automation and optimization of our shopping preferences. And Brienne, tell me a bit about like how do you, as a creative operations leader, create the environment for this magic to happen? Because it doesn't happen like just automatically where Kyle goes like, cool, we could do that. Like there's other priorities and things like that. And as a creative operations leader, the best ones, and I count you as amongst the small handful of them,
Aw.
create the right environment for great creative to happen. And that's where the magic of the partnership happens, I think.
Did I get that compliment because you and I discovered that we're both addicted to Diet Coke earlier?
Um, no, no. But we should definitely have a Diet Coke drinking contest at some point.
Definitely.
Yeah.
See what can happen. Um, so I think we're always on an evolution. I would say like a lot of the ability to create space for creative, we do sometimes really well and sometimes not well. Right. And I think that having that awareness and recognition is important for creative leaders, right? And also the business as a whole to have that awareness of like how do we better prioritize to make sure we're putting the right effort at the right moments at the right times for more strategic planning. What we do and what we've been trying to do as like part of our evolution of creative operations is actually track and record the data, right? So that we're able to understand where the team is unable to have that headspace. And so, we have monthly meetings here with various creative leaders, and we're looking at things like, oh, geez, we do have this person resourced across 4 different, very bespoke things. That's going to make it really hard, one, to move quickly on any one of those things. And two, they're not going to really feel that accountable or able to like chase that thread all the way to the end. And that's like kind of that shift that we want to enable creative to do. And so we're not doing it perfectly yet, but I think we're trying to leverage the data to influence the business side of it to say, hey, we actually need this. And when we do this, this is what happens. And then like lots of conversations with the creative team to make sure that the time that they need, the investment that they need, the brief is in a spot where they actually feel like they can sink their teeth into. That's where we're partnering. But we are like still on that journey. I would say we get it right sometimes, but not all the time. And like we're always striving for perfection.
I
So
do think though that something that just based off of years of working together, not just between Brianne and I, but our teams, the the relationship between ops and creative has gotten to a pretty healthy place where folks feel comfortable respectfully pushing back on each
Yeah.
other if they think that they're not being given what they need. There's a lot of honesty required between
Yeah, that's true.
ops and creatives in terms of, hey, this is actually going to take me this amount of time. You're not giving me the space to do it. And we've tried to set an example of like, deadlines are deadlines. We meet our deadlines, but like we how you get to meeting that deadline sometimes requires a level of adaptability and flexibility.
yeah, and on that, like there's honesty, and then sometimes everyone's coming at it with their best intentions. There's honest conversations, but it doesn't work out. So how do you know when the right conditions weren't created for creative to be able to do what it has the potential to do? I'll throw that to both of you.
Yeah. Uh, so I think that if I think that pretty early in a product in a pretty early in a project's life cycle, you can tell if this is going to be something that has the likelihood you're going to knock it out of the park, or if this is going to be a project that is painful and more prone to fail. almost universally it has to do with like, is the brief strong enough? Was something missing from the brief? Even if I have weighed in on the brief, or
Or
whoever
do you have enough
has,
alignment on
yeah,
the brief?
is
Is
someone, is
everyone
there a
convicted?
misalignment somewhere upstream? And those instances almost always reveal themselves very early when you kick off a project. And I'm a big believer that like some projects are hard. They should be hard. We're doing hard things sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. But they never need to hurt and be painful and feel like you're being tortured to get through them. And the moments where it does feel like torture, it's because of a misalignment somewhere. And that's where Bree or I expect to be pulled in so that we can help actually address that.
And I think even adding to that, on the operations side, like tactically, we also need to look at where do we have the team pulling their focus to? Because if they don't have the attention to focus on something that we know is hard or tricky, then they're never going to be successful. And so we're actively looking behind the scenes to make sure that person is set up to the most success that they can be.
Yep.
In the current, like, within reason of what's happening. And I also think one of the things we try to do is protect time for creatives, just to talk to creatives a little bit.
Yeah.
In between the projects, to sort of like be able to pre-visualize and think through how it could come to life or what those legs are. And
Totally.
that space is still needed.
That's you both also have the benefit of like 13 plus years experience each, right? So you sort of intuitively know this is off, it doesn't feel right. Kyle, it sounds like you're almost saying if your gut radar is going off, then say something. Even if you're 30 days into your job at Wayfair,
Totally.
like the best thing
Any
is to
job.
like rely on your gut.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have to. I think part of being a good creative is having some level of intuition around how something should manifest for the customer. And part of that intuition is how is it manifest, how is the process of, how do you feel while you're actually working on something? I don't think anyone goes into creative. I mean, maybe some of the great Renaissance painters go into it to be tortured, but like, I don't think we're living in an age of tortured artists. At least not in
Not in corporate
yeah,
America.
not in corporate America. Creatives should not feel like tortured artists.
Not like
I think
Van
they're
Gogh.
probably not in the right career.
I don't know, maybe not tortured, but maybe we do need a little bit of that, Michelangelo and Da Vinci of staring at the blank canvas, which leads me to my next question for Brienne is like, again, creative operations started with scale and speed, and that's still an important part of the equation. That's not going away. But it seems like there is an increasing realization that creative thinking time is required. And as Kyle knows better than anybody, actually, I think every human being is creative, and we all know we never know when that spark of insight or innovation is going to strike us. And we need time and space for that to happen. And most organized creative teams live in a world of like, oh, you have 3 hours available, I need to maximize your utilization. So how do you think about like when you and your team are scheduling, thinking about utilization and the competing priorities of scale, speed, and brand storytelling, do you like purposely create time for like creative thinking?
So a few things. One, we try to separate out where things actually require that creative thinking and actually break it apart from the project that needs to get something executed, which I think is a big thing. Like, we want to do a new system for our promo. Well, that's not being done at the same time that you have to execute something. That's actually like specific thinking around a specific problem that will eventually fuel scale and speed and output, but that requires a different level of creative thinking. And so what we try to do is find those moments where we're actually creating a system or creating something that's going to be scalable, and like ring fence that to be its own thing, and try not to muddy it with the production of that thing. Yeah. right? Like we'll get to like the production and the scale and the efficiency driving, but let's like, we actually move faster when we have a point of view of where the full body of work is going. And so we still do like do utilization, and we try to maximize it. We try to make sure that the way that we're scoping and segmenting projects is that there is some level of creative and concepting time. Actually, I was looking at our data, and so we have our data. I'm so nerdy, but we were looking at our data by channel, and there's one thing in here that's not a channel, and it's concepting. And concepting, when you look at the full scope of what we're doing, is probably where we're spending the most time, which I thought was interesting, especially in light of this conversation. Because we're concepting across many other things, and then eventually that gets fueled into the channel execution.
Yeah,
it's all in service of something.
Yeah, and I found that sometimes, within a marketing organization, the more linear thinkers who tend not to be in creative, can really struggle with the fact that like we're going to spend this amount of time concepting, but it means that we're going to be able to output the churn and burn stuff a lot faster. So it's in service of that.
Yeah, Brianne, you might be familiar with this because I've talked a lot about it on, through the first 30, 40 episodes. It's like scale versus storytelling. And storytelling is really about like concepting. And I think it's probably a healthy indicator that a lot of concepting work never sees the light of day. But you need to do that concepting. And people think that's a waste. And I always go for anyone that's sort of read about like again referencing the Renaissance artists or like Raphael and Michelangelo and all those people. Like it wasn't one shot for the Mona Lisa. It wasn't one shot for anything these guys painted. It was like version after version after version after version. And they got to it. And what you're making me think of, or maybe I'm forcing this to segue into one of our last two topics, is all that concepting in a way is sort of like an internal Wayfair creative LLM. Like those concepts may not be used, but they are, whether people realize it or not, they are creating like it's embedding into the creative team. I don't know how you sort of like save it, share it, anything like that, but it is sort of like this creative consciousness, like all consciousness is basically an LLM in my opinion. So it's like this creative consciousness inside of Wayfair, and it's an investment because it may not be used today for what marketing needs done this week, this quarter, whatever else. But that concepting gets you closer to greatness.
Didn't we have an award for many years on like the greatest things on the cutting room floor?
Yeah, I mean, we do, to keep the team engaged and inspired, and to actually acknowledge all of the great work that we do. we used to give out an award for best project that never made it outside of the
four walls.
Yeah, the four walls, and
because there is great work. I've never thought about thinking about it as a collective, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I would actually start to gather all that because, in the future, like training it on something could be super interesting. And so segueing into AI, and this time we're all sort of living in, and it's sort of like, it sort of docks into this ongoing sort of seesaw between scale and storytelling. I do think they're two distinctly different needs and processes now. Like, where do you both sort of see the tension? It's clear that you've worked through some of it, but I think we're entering into an era where there's going to be a lot of like easy buttons to go, oh, we just don't want 10, we want 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. And there's already tools out there doing this. And I just think it's creating a tsunami of commoditized crap, I think is the technical term.
I mean, I will say right now, especially as we've brought on more agencies, more freelancers, we're getting pitched work from more places than we ever have before. And Brianne and I are both big believers and big supporters of leveraging AI tools to make creative jobs easier, to help us scale things. But like, without question, you can tell when someone is pitching you work that was developed through an AI tool. And like, I don't know,
It's
like,
not unique.
yeah. And what AI does is it is putting pressure on creatives to truly be breakthrough and truly be innovative and pick your buzzword, because a creative, it, if you're delivering middling work, AI can do it. It needs to be work that actually does build on top of that. Um, and so, we have made it a concerted effort to really embrace the tools that are available to us here. I think that we're better for it. Um, I think that AI is only as good as the person using it and that person's taste level.
Well said.
100% agree. Well, then why don't we bring into the home stretch? I want to connect a couple of dots. I always do a segment at the end that I just record on my own, but and I'm still going to do that, some reflection questions. But um, it occurs to me that what you did with that physical retail experience and the emotional reaction Brianne talked about, and that you've heard from other customers, that is to me a reflection of where creative needs to go. It may not be physical for everybody, it could be digital, whatever it is, but the emotional reaction is what matters, because I think what we've forgotten over the last 10, 15 years in this increasingly digital first world is, and as we've sort of navigated away, and I don't mean Wayfair, I mean we, just the meta we sort of navigated away from thinking about the customer and serving them, and we've been serving the algorithms. And I think what we're going to discover and where AI is going to take us is to the point of increasingly diminishing returns when it comes to AI generated creative work. I think AI can and should be used by creatives as part of the creative process to spur ideation, to be a creative thinking partner. I've got this idea I'm toying with of a chief storytelling officer that could be sort of a thinking partner, a devil's advocate during the creative process. But ultimately, Kyle, as you said, you've got to have a point of view, and you've got to like want to make a dent in the emotional universe, so to speak. And I think what I've heard today is sort of leading me to two predictions that I've got over the next 5 to 10 years. I think 5 years, maybe 10. I think creative leaders, today's creative leaders, the really good ones, are going to be tomorrow's CEOs. Because what organizations are going to need more than ever before is creative leadership. Because in a world where we can copy and commoditize each other with ease, creativity is all you need. And for anyone that knows, that is sort of a play on the attention is all you need white paper that was written before the digital transformers came out that enabled ChatGPT and all these other tools. And I think creative operations, my prediction there is that today's definition of creative operations is already dead. The profession just doesn't know it yet. And creative operations is really going to be about creating the creative culture. Sounds like a mouthful. And Brianne, you're already starting to do that at Wayfair. So those are my two predictions, and connecting some dots. But I'll leave any final words to the two of you.
We may need to have AI work on the creative
I think
culture
fostering the creative culture, building the creative culture. That works.
Designing
the creative culture. That's a good one.
Good thing,
Okay, that's the move. Yeah.
Good thing we brought a copywriter to this.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
No, that was great. I mean, like, those are some interesting predictions. I can't wait. Kyle, it sounds like you'll be the next CEO then.
I'm available. Please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you both very much for doing this. This was fantastic. I was looking forward to this, and my excitement about it was well deserved. It was a great chat, and this is going to be very valuable for the listeners.
Thank you so much. A lot of fun.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.